Jesus was born in Bethlehem. He must have fulfilled Micah 5, of course.
Boy, this is really not good at all. He's proving the putative fulfillments from the Hebrew Bible more than anyone is. You have to have faith, Justin.
All right, welcome to the Deconstruction Zone. I'm joined again by the brilliant Rabbi Tovia Singer. Tovia, it's good to see you again today.
Hey, it's Justin's great to see you.
We're going to be dissecting the prophecy in Micah 5. It also shows up in Matthew chapter 2. And when we're talking about the prophecies of Jesus, this seems like one of those prophecies that's a no-brainer. Jesus was born in Bethlehem. He must have fulfilled Micah 5, of course, right?
Right, exactly. So for those who don't know, there are 89 chapters in the Gospels. 4 of them are infancy narratives, 2 in Luke and 2 in Matthew. And we always talk about Matthew a lot because he's proving the putative fulfillments from the Hebrew Bible more than anyone is. And as it turns out, this is a very tricky one. So in Matthew chapter 2, we're told that wise men from the east follow a star and find their way to Herod's palace. And we'll talk about in a moment, why do they need to stop off at Herod's palace? If they had a magical star that was guiding them, presumably from Persia to Jesus, like the star just knew to stop off in Jerusalem, but just couldn't find its way to Jesus' home. That's really very critical.
But that brings up a good side question, which is, have you observed stars moving around in the night sky? Like, how would you follow one?
You have to have faith, Justin. Where is that? See, this is why you bother me. You have to have faith that you can follow a star. I've done that. We've both done that so many times. We follow a magic star that has GPS, and somehow it settles over a palace, right? But it is, in Matthew's view, it's a magic star. And it's a magic star that leads them to Herod's palace. I mean, if you knew where Herod's palace is, I mean, Persia is something about 800,000, it's 1,000 miles away from Jerusalem. If the star could take them that far, Bethlehem, for those who don't know this, is walking distance from Jerusalem. I mean, it really is. You can, It's just, it depends what part of Jerusalem you're in, but it's just a few miles. There are neighborhoods of Jerusalem where you can see Bethlehem. So it's they're all in Judea.
And not to delay our conversation, but there is one question that maybe deserves to be asked, which is, what do these Persian emissaries have to do with the Jewish Messiah? Why would they care?
Right, but that's the point of Matthew here. The point of Matthew is to show you how the Gentiles are open to the truth, whereas the Jews are blind. So this is really, people often think of John as being the most anti-Semitic of the four Gospels. And it's quite a bar. I mean, like who's worse, Goebbels or Streicher? It's like, but I think, and mine is not the consensus view, but I think Matthew is more anti-Jewish. The reason I think that blocks people from recognizing that is because the author of the first gospel is appealing to the Hebrew Bible, and therefore, presumably, he's speaking to a Jewish audience. So how could he be anti-Semitic? But really, what we see here is really the book covers, the bookends of Matthew. So Matthew begins by introducing us to Jews and Gentiles and contrasting them. And whereas the Gentiles who come from a different place, they know the truth and they're going to worship the Savior, and that's all they want, and bring gifts for the Savior. It's going to be the Jews, and most importantly, the person who represents the Jews, the man who called himself the King of the Jews, Herod, who's not only not going to venerate the Savior, but when he discovers that the King of the Jews is born in Bethlehem, he's going to set out to kill him, and that maps on perfectly to the passion narrative, that violent passion narrative of Matthew 27, where not only Pontius Pilate, but the only cameo that his wife makes in the entire New Testament, well, both of them are pleading that to the crazy Jews that this man's innocent. Pontius Pilate's wife is saying, "I had a dream that this guy's
Right.
innocent," and and Pontius Pilate, we are told, was washing his hands of this. I want nothing to do with this because this man's innocent. And the crazy crackpot, I understand Candace Owens. The crazy, I get her. I get her completely. I get her. I get her. George, her husband. I get all these guys. I get Mel Gibson. And the crazy Jews are going, crucify him, crucify him. And in verse 25, we take his blood upon ourselves and our children. So once again, the scene is set for Jews and Gentiles, and a complete polar opposite response to the Christ. The Jews, we want to kill him. Like, of course, you remember when David Koresh, the leader of the Branch Davidians,
Right.
was holed up in Waco, Texas during the Clinton administration. Of course, Jews from Brooklyn were trying to find him and kill him. Like, Jews would care, but no, we care less. So it's really what we're seeing is a proto passion narrative where once again the Gentiles know the truth and trying to worship the newborn Savior, and the Jews and the representative of the Jews is trying to kill the newborn Savior and just kills every child under 2 years old in Bethlehem. So that's what's happening, and that's why I get it when I see the stuff that's very anti-Jewish, why Christians would have such a low view of Jews, because this literature is very well written.
Right.
The character development is extraordinary. The protagonist is clear. I mean, think about what like what your favorite movies are, like your top 5. It's the character development. You may have loved Breaking Bad or Shawshank Redemption. The character development is so cool. That the New Testament is written that way, and the Jews are just way off. So that's what's really happening here, because if the star really was magical, and that's what comes into view here, that the star knows how to find its way, why didn't the star just go straight to Bethlehem? Why the stop off in
Right.
Jerusalem? It's completely vestigial. If the
Right.
star knows, like, why do you need to stop off? Like,
'Cause
you're a magic star, right?
the Jews have to be condemned somehow. They have to be called out.
Right. You need that segue. You need that little pericope where the star stops off at the king of the Jews, at his palace. Herod, of course, is an Idiomite. He's not really a Jew. He certainly is not a scholar. And he has to consult with the Jews, who then inform the Messiah is to be born in Bethlehem. And then now everybody knows, right? Herod knows, and the wise men know, right? And they each do the exact opposite thing. The wise men follow the star, like they plug in the Waze or whatever to, Google Maps,
Right.
and the star takes them right over the house. A star stops over a house in Bethlehem. And what do? They bring gifts. They bring 3 gifts. I think that's why there's this legend that there were 3 wise men, but it doesn't
Because
say
of the
that.
3 gifts. Yeah.
Yeah, 3 gifts, right. So they bring us and worship him. And that word worship in Greek, is an adoration. Doesn't mean they believe in the Trinity, but
Right.
they worship the kid. And Herod is going, kill the kid, and because we don't know who, just kill every child who's 2 years old and younger. So this is a dirty setup. It's
It
like you go,
is.
oh God. As a Jew reading this for the first time, this is like, oh boy. Now I didn't know, when I was a kid, I didn't know why non-Jews hated me. Growing up in
Right.
Brooklyn, like, I didn't understand it. Like, I thought non-Jews were insane, frankly. I just thought they were completely nuts. Like, what did I do to them? All we do is we do their taxes. We come up with a vaccine for polio. Like, what did you ever get beaten up by an accountant? Like, why? What is like? What is why? Why is this? Probably your baby was probably delivered by a Jew. Like, what? What is this hatred about? I didn't understand it. When I read Matthew, as everyone does, we read Matthew first. I went, oh boy, this is really not good at all. This
Right.
is not going to work out well. And I frankly, I express my gratitude to Christians who read this and are not anti-Semitic. It blows my mind away because I would hate me if I believe this. I mean, I get it completely. I understand, and this is it. So it's this. Every part of this is really built in, and all these texts have been written and like Matthew, although not the infancy narrative, is writing upon other sources and collecting other
Right.
sources. Lord only knows how many gospels there really were that even predate Mark. We don't know.
I would
So
say
these are
misusing the sources.
yes, of course. They're editing it. They're taking Mark and M sources and Q sources and editing this all together. Who knows what would happen if we can get back to the autograph and find the people who put this originally together and all the sources that came from. But that's where it's the Jews. It really is. So this very much, like, if you want to really get kicked in the stomach, and I would just want to say this to the Jews: if you want to get kicked in the stomach, just read Matthew 27 and you'll go, okay, I get it. You can
Right.
just get it. you know the Muslim anti-Semitism in the Islamic world is they're just plagiarizing it from the Christian world. The idea
Right.
that Jews control, governments and banks and control the world, and that's where it comes from. I mean, Jews were able to control Pontius Pilate, a raving lunatic. So yeah, so the magic star is of course odd, but whatever, fine. You could
Once
see
you've
that, but
given into the God, you can give into magic.
yeah, of course. But then why the star? I mean, if it's a magic star, I mean, why does it? Then why do I need Herod? Well, Herod's really important here because you don't have the setup, which indicts the Jews and not just exonerates the non-Jews, but shows that it's the Gentiles, they don't have the scales over their eyes that the Jews do. The Jews are
Right.
blind all the time. You
Mhm.
know, just a comment, if I may, just because we're just thinking out loud, and it's a thought I just want to bounce off you, that very frequently Christians say that Jesus claimed to be God because the Jews pick up stones. They want to kill Jesus for saying things that they interpret to mean he's claiming to be God. But as it turns out in the Christian Bible, the Jews are wrong about everything. So if the Jews think, that means why are we suddenly saying, oh, yeah, the Jews are right about that one?
Right.
So, right, but the Jews are wrong about everything. That's the whole key. So, in that Jesus could forgive a paralytic sin, and the Jews thought that only God, well, that doesn't make it true because
Right.
that was, in fact, I don't think that's what I'm sure neither of us think that Mark believed. Forget about the Trinity, but Mark is clearly an adoptionist text. It's the
Right.
Jews are wrong. They're misunderstanding.
The general idea there is that if he's the fulfillment of Daniel chapter 7, which he's clearly not, that the authority that God has would be given to him. It's not that he is God, it's that the authority is given to him. But
Mm.
Christians read it and they say, oh, well, he must be claiming that he's God. But Jesus never said that. Jesus says, all authority has been given to me, not that I am God. And then you get crazy ideas like the Trinity, which just breaks the laws of logic and mathematics.
Right. And as it turns out, at the very end of the book of John, we have a unique text where Jesus, on the same day as the first Easter, breathes on his disciples. So they get the
Mhm.
Pentecost experience right there. And they are told that now they are going to be able to forgive sin because
That's
they've
right.
got that from. So it's right there in the text that the ability to forgive sin does not mean that you're God because you couldn't be someone who represents God. And that's clearly what the fourth gospel had in view. So
Yeah.
it doesn't
That's
work.
that's the prevailing opinion I got from reading the scholarship. But let's jump into the text of Matthew and then back into Micah. And
Right.
there's some funny stuff happening with the text that I think you and I can discuss here. So it says, calling together the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people, which is a really interesting way to phrase it, because if you go back to the text of Micah, that's not really what it says. It says something close, but it doesn't actually say that.
Well,
In fact,
if you skip a verse, it does say that. What? Yeah. So,
yeah,
Matthew is very careful here
he's
because if you,
he's stitching two verses together.
that's right. That means if you stop, I conceded to Matthew, meaning you read it that out of Bethlehem will come a ruler. Okay. If you stop at ruler, going back to Micah, if Micah didn't have a part, Micah 5, verse 2, and for those viewers who are using a Hebrew Bible, Jewish Bible, so it would be Micah 5, verse 1, but it's the same passage. If you don't have the modifier at the very end is everything. So if there is no modifier at the end, if the text simply says, if you should emerge from me a ruler, um, over Israel, right? Stop. That would mean that the Messiah is supposed to come. The Messiah himself is supposed to come from Bethlehem.
Right.
However, there's a modifier at the very end which says the following. So you'd have to now go back to Micah 5, verse 2 in a Christian Bible, verse 1 in a Jewish Bible, where it says, Umi Moitzoisov, and his origins are mikedem olam. What is the relationship between Bethlehem and the Messiah? Is his origins are not from that he's born there, but rather his origins are from an earlier time, from ancient days. Now that will
Right.
not work. Now, for those viewers who are just not familiar with history, it's really important. Um, Micah lived during the Assyrian Empire. He was a contemporary of Isaiah, of Hosea, of Amos. They all lived at the same time, okay, during the great Assyrian Empire, in the heat of it all, okay? So that means that they lived 2,700 years ago, approximately. King David lived 3,000 years ago, which means that Micah lived roughly 3 centuries after King David. So this is written 300 years after King David. So when Micah is predicting the coming of the Messiah, he is saying that the origins, how does the Messiah in the future relate to Bethlehem? It's Mikedem Meolam, from ancient days, from old times. And that's a problem because, as it turns out, King David was born in Bethlehem. See 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 58. He was
Exactly.
a bingo.
Pulling up right now. So in 1 Samuel 17:12, it says, David was the son of an Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah named Jesse. And if you read through the histories, like in the book of Chronicles, you'll discover who Ephrath and Bethlehem are. They're ancient ancestors that towns are named after, that are the origins of King David. So my understanding is Micah is suggesting that there's going to be a king from the ancient line of David's stock.
Exactly. Exactly. So what Matthew does is the offensive text in Micah is his origins. That's a modifier. Again, if that last section of Micah 5:2 did not exist, Christians would be correct, everyone be correct, that Micah is predicting the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem or would come from Bethlehem. But that modifier at the very end is an offensive. It's a catastrophe for the claim of the church, for the claim of Matthew. So therefore, what the author of the first gospel does is he simply takes his mouse, he selects in the words, his origins are from old days, from ancient times. He selects it. You have now white letters on a blue background. He hits the delete key and said interpolates what it says 2 verses later, and he will be a shepherd, and thus collapsing the center. And then it looks like any normal, reasonable Christian who's reading Matthew chapter 2, verse 6, because they don't check it out. They don't go back to Micah to double check it, to believe that it actually is predicted the Messiah is supposed to be born in Bethlehem.
Right. And there's something really interesting happening too in the 5th chapter of Micah, which I think a lot of Christians haven't read. But if you look at what this figure is supposed to do, it says that he's going to stand and feed his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, which is really interesting because if you believe that Jesus is the figure being spoken of in Matthew chapter 5, that means he has a God. He is not the God. In the English translation, the very first line of verse 5 is really important. It's actually the end of verse 4, but it says, he shall be the one of peace. And if you're a Christian, you may not really have the context of what it means to be the one of peace. It might mean that, oh, you're just a peaceful person, because Jesus said turn the other cheek, or that different things like that. He said live by the sword, die by the sword. But my understanding is the one of peace in Micah chapter 5 is the one who does the requirements of peace in chapter 4, where he's quoting from Isaiah chapter 2. And if you go back one more chapter, he tells you what this time of peace is going to be like. And in Isaiah, he tells you this is the Messianic age. In the days to come, the mountain of the Lord's the mountain of the Lord's temple shall be established as the highest of the mountains and shall be raised above the hills. People shall stream to it. Many nations shall come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways and we may walk in his paths. And then out of Zion shall go forth instruction, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He will judge between many people, arbitrate between strong nations far away. And then this is the important part. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. And nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn of war anymore. And so we have this beautiful picture of the restoration of Israel and this world peace. Nation won't go to war with anyone anymore. And we're going to have a king on the throne. And if Micah 5 is talking about this guy, this leader, this king is going to be the one of peace, surely this is a callback to the previous chapter, is it not?
Absolutely. And it is so striking that here we have, no doubt, the most explicit messianic passage in all the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible is enormous. It's nearly 4 times the size of the Christian Bible. And the passage you quoted from Micah 4, and we see another passage in Isaiah 2, which is almost verbatim the same, which even the United Nations, I'm not a big fan, but even the United Nations had the brains to engrave these words on a wall on First Avenue and 42nd Street called the Isaiah Wall. And the nation will not lift up sword against neither will they learn of war anymore. And that verse doesn't make it into the Christian Bible? That's mind-blowing. I mean, how is it that's in the most explicit, crystalline passage in all of the Hebrew Bible that actually describes the Messiah? It's one of the rare times that we find the Messiah is someone who teaches, he gives haichacha, and he's a shofet, which means he judges. And we know from Isaiah 11, a similar kind of passage, the wolf lying with the lamb. People always get the lion with the lamb, which is wrong, because that's Revelation 5.
Right.
But that's what they're getting it for that. So everyone makes that mistake. But the key is, here you have Isaiah 2 and Micah 4, as you pointed out, which is the preamble to Micah 5. And that doesn't make it in? Really? you and I both know why it would not serve the authors of the Christian Bible well to put in this feigned messianic prophecy, which the UN thought was good enough for it. And the reason is that Jesus didn't do any of those things. Quite the contrary. It was shortly after his crucifixion, perhaps 40 years, that the Jews go to war with Rome. The Second Commonwealth is destroyed, the temple destroyed, wars explode, and the Jews, not all, but almost all the Jews go into exile. It was much more bloody than the destruction of the first. They didn't do anything like that. So we're going to delete that, but we're going to have in Matthew chapter 2, verse 23, that Jesus came from the city of Nazareth, so it should be filled, he should be called a Nazarene, totally made up. So let's make up stuff
Yeah.
and does not quote the most famous, iconic messianic prophecy in all the Hebrew Bible.
The crazy thing is the little play on words he's doing with Netzer in Isaiah chapter 11. He totally, if he's saying that Jesus is the fulfillment of Isaiah 11, he missed every point of that prophecy. Every part of Isaiah chapter 11 is the era of peace where Yahweh's on the throne in Israel and all the nations are coming to know that he's the one true God and all the remnant are restored. Jesus didn't do any of that. It's irrelevant that he came from a city or he moved to a city that sounds like the word branch in Hebrew, but doesn't mean anything.
Right. So, and that's why you need the red flag of a false religion. And that is the good things are going to happen in the second coming. The
That's
things
right.
that are verifiable. Like imagine that, there's a reason why banks make a fortune of money. They loan out money, they pay very little interest on the money they have, and they loan it out and with credit cards. But if you want a credit card, which banks make fortunes on, they do ask for, like, what's your social security number, right?
Right.
And why do they do that? Because they're going to look up your credit history and look at the unsecured loans that the debt that you've accumulated in the past, and how well you've, paid back the loans. And based on that, they decide whether you're worthy of an unsecured uh, loan, a credit card, right? I mean, that's how it works. And no, if you did not, or if you have no credit history, or if you did not pay back, then they're not going to give you a credit card, even though they get crazy interest rates if you don't pay the full balance. So we, in our lives, are governed that way. We look at your history and then we're able to project. But these are brilliant because all the things that Jesus supposedly fulfilled are things that are unfalsifiable. So he's saying, we're not giving you the social security number. Just give me the credit card. Like, trust me. Well, the second coming, and I'll do it this time. Well, we can't do that. And that's what's happening. So if theoretically, I mean, we know Jesus wasn't born in Bethlehem, but in fact, this comes up in John. I don't know if you ever thought about that, but in John, it seems that John really was hostile to all this, because in John 7, people scream out, but isn't the Messiah supposed to be born in Bethlehem? And the author of the fourth gospel just ignores that. Because I think just the whole idea that Jesus was born supernaturally and Mary all bothered him because he's looking at Jesus as a logos from the eternal past. So, like, the author doesn't rush in to say, no, but he was born in Bethlehem. It just, he leaves it there silently, just as Mary, Jesus' mother, is never mentioned in the book of John by name. And when
Right.
she's introduced to us at the wedding in Cana, it's rather derisive. So John sees Mary as an annoyance to his, his logos and his high view of Jesus. So absolutely. So right, second coming. Right, but this doesn't make it in. Just a cut up version of Matthew 2, of Micah 5, verse 2. And I think Christians really should look up everything we're saying so that you see that the text isn't there, that he'll be a shepherd over Israel. That comes 2 verses later, so it's copied and pasted in. Why does Matthew selectively eradicate the modifier at the end. We know why. It's very transparent. These are not mistakes. These are not, like, someone like came to him or, and
Right.
it's not like Buddha, whatever. It's not that. This is a crime scene. This is
I
stuff that, yeah.
I agree. And last thing I want to say, because you're 100% right. If you look at what Matthew appears to be doing, he seems to be modifying the Greek text a little bit. I did a little bit comparison in the past about whether or not, like, is Matthew copying from the Greek or from the Hebrew? I think he's copying from the Greek, but he changes the Greek. Even the Greek he changes in a way which sounds more like Jesus. So I highlighted in red the translation difference from my translation into English. And he says, for from you comes a leader who shepherds my people. Well, listen, a leader who shepherds is you could fit that into the Jesus model. You know what I mean? But
Mm,
what it really says in the Greek text, we got archanta. This is an actual ruler, a prince. It says, you shall come forth for me one who is to be a ruler in Israel, which is way different than a leader. Like a high priest could be a leader,
mm,
a governor could be a leader. But the actual Greek text of Micah and the Hebrew text of Micah seems to be indicating we've got an actual government leader, a
mm,
Mashiach. In fact, in the Aramaic, I looked up the Aramaic Targums from Sefaria, and in the Aramaic Targum, it literally says it inserts the word Mashiach into the actual text. His translation wanted you to know that this wasn't just a shepherd. This wasn't just a normal guy. This was an actual. This was the guy.
mm. Right, right.
But
This is right.
Matthew couldn't do that. Matthew
No
couldn't
way.
make Jesus that guy, so he had to change it.
Right. Yeah, it's alter it. This is all very deliberate stuff. This is fraud, and that's what's happening. But Christians don't read the Hebrew Bible very well, or at all. I don't think. I don't think they're reading Micah, except for a very
Mm.
studious few, and certainly not in the original Hebrew. And therefore, to them, this is a clear fulfillment.
Right. And I do think, we've got some better English translations these days, and we've got some good academic study Bibles these days. I don't know if the average Christian is reading them. I think a lot of them will buy them and put them on the shelf, and then they'll go to church on Sunday and not actually read it. But, like, for example, I've got the Westminster Study Bible, the New Oxford Study Bible, and a bunch of other really good academic study Bibles, and all of them agree with everything you and I are saying. Christians are going to accuse us of making things up. But no, this is the scholarly consensus. They knew what this prophecy was about. It's only the pastors in church trying to keep you in the church that are going to equivocate and say, no, well, actually, technically, he kind of fulfilled it if you squint hard enough. But scholars know.
Right. Right. That means that people might think that you and I have an angst against the church, and therefore we're twisting things, or we're not being charitable. That's really not the case, right? If you look this up in the scholarly sources, this is rudimentary. This is not like theory. So there is disagreement among in the academic world about documentary hypothesis and precisely where what goes, and there's heated debates over it. There's no heated debates over this. This
Right.
is transparent. This is naked. This this is just very simple. The modifier, which is an indictment against Matthew's application of this text, has been jettisoned and replaced with what is found in Micah just 2 passages later, which is very, very
Right.
simple what's happened here. That's it, and
Which
the other
is,
thing, yeah.
I would say the last thing I would say is Micah's quoting it as though you're not going to go back and look at the source, which is wild because that means he must know that his audience isn't going to
You mean
go back and look at the
you mean
source.
Matthew is writing this
Yes,
as though,
Matthew. Yeah.
right. Right,
Yeah.
right, that's right, and that's why it's because it's the Old Testament, really. It's the Old Testament, so therefore, why do we have to? I have friends who are Muslim scholars who privately say to me with great relief that they are not anchored to the Jewish Bible. They're not stuck with the Jewish Bible as Christians are. So the Muslims, not all, but 90% of them believe that the Jews corrupted the actual text of the Hebrew Bible.
Right.
So Muslim scholars say, we're not stuck with this stuff, because they could just say if it's not doesn't comport with Islamic teachings, then the Jews corrupted it. And they'll say to me, we're friends, they'll just say,
Mhm.
I'm not stuck with these problems. The Christians are the ones who are stuck with all of it. They all agree. There's an absolute consensus. This is so true. You don't need a scholar. You just look at, what Justin and I both always say is just look it up for yourself. Just open it up, read it. And one of the advantages you have, Justin, which is really unparalleled in this world, is that you actually have made enormous headway in looking at the original text of the Bible, meaning the actual Hebrew and the actual Greek, which gives you a remarkable advantage in addressing these very thoughtful questions.
Well, I think we might have covered as much as we can cover on Micah chapter 5. So hopefully we can come back together soon and talk about one of the other prophecies. This is probably my favorite topic of all time, because I think this is, to me, this was the topic that was when I was a Christian, I thought this was the most convincing evidence that Jesus was the Messiah. Was like, well, surely he fulfilled all those prophecies. And I got acquainted with all the prophecies and I realized, oh no, I think the gospel authors are lying to us. And I think a lot of normal people come to that conclusion when they take an honest look at what the prophets are actually saying. So, I'd love to continue covering some of the prophecies that we find in the Hebrew scriptures about the Messiah. Um,
Right. I just want to get in one caveat because I know someone's going to argue this is that so the words in Hebrew. So there's one argument, or else you're gonna get it in the comment section. So it says umaychaisav, his going forth. That means his origins
right,
are mikedem, which means kodem, means from earlier times. Mimei olam. Okay. So mimei olam means from ancient days, from ancient times. Okay. But
right.
if you now there are some Christian Bibles that actually translate that as eternity.
Or
So be
days everlasting.
everlasting. They everlasting, bingo, the
Yeah.
Trinity, Jesus divine. That's not true at all. This phrase, "mimei olam" or "kimei olam," always means ancient days. After all, it's yamim, days,
Right,
olam meaning ancient days. And this phrase, I just have to cover it, or else we're gonna get ourselves in all kinds of trouble, appears, I think 5 other places in the Hebrew Bible that
right,
"mimei olam" or "kamei olam." For example, Micah chapter 7, verse 14. So there it says "kamei olam." It's the exact same words, but somehow in Micah 7:14, all the Christian Bibles translated there as days of old, or in Malachi 3:4, or in Isaiah 6:63, verse 11, or 63:9. Again, Yemei Olam. And what's very important is that phrase, days of old, is by many translators is rendered as eternity because they want to make it look like he must be really
right,
divine. But in every other place that phrase appears, the same Christian translators, when there's nothing at stake, when they have no dog in it, render it correctly as ancient days, the olden times. So
right.
there it is. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Actually, I'm glad you brought that up because kind of forgot to put that into the conversation. But yeah, if you just take that phrase and copy it, and see where it shows up and how it gets translated elsewhere, it doesn't get translated the way you would think it's going to get translated. It gets translated as just ancient days or from the days of old. It seems to be an idiomatic expression that is not technically literal with the word olam, but maybe we could say one
Well,
thing,
olam
olam
olam is
has a semantic
flexible.
range, right?
It's flexible. It means olam can be eternity, or it could be, as an example, Hannah, is that how they say it? When she, in the beginning of Samuel, makes a vow to God, she didn't have children. It's a really sad event. Her competition was having babies, she wasn't, and she promises God in her prayer that if you would give me a child, I will dedicate him to the sanctuary for Olam ever. Same exact words. So, or you have a servant who serves his master Olam forever. So that word is very flexible. So it's always the modifier there. Or it could be Olam Va'ed, which is forever and ever. So be
Right.
very careful about this fallacy, which is called a semantic fallacy, where you fix a word to only one possible meaning, which is completely vacuous. It's a scam, and then say, aha, it has to. It's not the way it works. So it's what's the modifier there. But when it says days of olam, so then it always means days. It means it's not eternity. So that always means from the old times. And by the way, I'll just refine a little bit in the context. As an example, in Micah 7:14, same exact words. What's in view? It's really also not just it means that. I don't want to sound pedantic. It literally means let us bring back the great offerings like in the old days. You remember how good
Right.
things were? Let's bring it back. So it really always means like the good old days. That's really how it's always used in Tanakh. And, that's why the Christian Bibles go with eternity only here because it's convenient. But me olam or kim olam, it doesn't matter what prefix you, when it's days of olam, it always means, I'm paraphrasing, the good old days. That's what it means.
Right.
Let's bring it back, like like the good old days. So that's very important to cover. And Christian Bibles deliberately mistranslate that, and we see it's deliberate because they somehow wisen up whenever that phrase is used anywhere else in the Hebrew Bible. They render it correctly.
Yeah, precisely. And the argument that I've heard quite a bit is, well, when they translate it into the Greek, they use the Greek word aeon, and aeon is just an indefinite long period of time. Doesn't necessarily mean forever, like the age. And then they'll make the exact same semantic fallacy and say, well, it's never forever. It's always it's always a finite period of time, which again
Right.
I think is wrong. But yeah, if you look up the phrasing that you've mentioned, the way that phrase actually gets used in the Hebrew Bible is the ancient good old days, exactly. And
Right.
why would we be concerned about the ancient good old days? Well, we're talking about King David. Those were the idealistic time period, united monarchy, king on the throne, all the enemies underneath his feet. Those were the good days, right?
Right. Right. Exactly. Those 80 years, King David reigned for 40 years and King Solomon for 40 years. That's the golden period of Jewish history. That's,
Right.
as you said, a united monarchy and so on. So it's let's bring it back to the good old. So that's always the context. See Isaiah 63:11. But the key
Yep.
point is that they get it wrong here. Not all of them do. There are some Christian Bibles that do render it correctly, but too many of them don't, and it's still deliberate. And this is why I feel I don't feel this anger at Christians, even when they say things that are unflattering of me. I'm not, because I know why they're exposed to this kind of drivel. It makes sense to them, and they certainly think I'm blind, and they think I'm the Antichrist and all those other wonderful things. So it's important for them just to look it up for themselves.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Rabbi Tovia Singer, for joining me. And I hope you had a great rest of your day. And I'm sure we'll meet again soon.
I look forward to it. Thanks, Justin. If you enjoyed this program, please like and subscribe.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נעשה בחפצו כל